Hey there, we are Jess, Greg, and Maya. Together we are self-converting our 2017 Ford Transit into our adventure mobile. Last week you watched us do a few smaller maintenance items. This week we are tackling a huge project, brakes. Hey guys, welcome back to the van build.
This is maintenance part 2. We're going to show you how to do brakes front and rear on the Ford Transit.
Let's get to it.
Alright, let's tackle these brakes. I think I know what I'm doing. Start out by getting the caliper off. These are the only 2 bolts we're going to be reusing this entire time. Everything else Ford says you have to throw away. Yes! So you learn so much doing it. Doing one side before this. Alright, pads off next. Yes, I know these look brand new. But feel free to leave a comment down below telling me that these are like brand new. You'll see why later why I'm doing all the brakes. Alright, next up, caliper bracket. We are throwing these away. Next up, we're gonna take the hub off of the knuckle here. And to do that, you need a long impact T50 Torx bit, and you stick it inside these holes. You have to line it up, and there's bolts in there, and there's 5 of them, and we're gonna have to pull them out. So, as always with Torx, I gotta be really careful not to strip these because that would just be awful. Another thing to note, if you turn the key to the first position, it'll unlock your steering. You'll see me pushing the steering around. That's because I have it unlocked on the column. So that's highly recommend doing that when you're doing brake jobs. And you are throwing these away. You'll see these bolts. That is to separate the rotor from the hub. But as you can see, our hub looks really bad. So we are replacing that with the rotors, so I do not need to remove these. And, as you're going to see in a minute, I'm gonna want my rotors still connected to the hub because I'm gonna have to use a BFH to get that out. And if you don't know what BFH stands for, Google it. Never, ever, ever, ever beat your rotors with a hammer if you plan on reusing them. Make sure these threaded holes are very clean, while also you'll see this. That is your ABS sensor. So you notice I was being very careful when cleaning this out, is to preserve that sensor. So if you have a Ford Transit and you're planning to do this, Dorman sells all the bolts you need in one kit. There's the part number, 926128. You open it up. There's every bolt we just threw away. We're gonna use the ones with blue to attach the rotor to the new hub. Rotor's attached to the hub. Let's put it on the vehicle. And just for right now, I just barely ran those in. Ford has a really specific torque sequence for these. So we'll do that once it's all put together on the vehicle. Always wipe down your brake rotors. Let's lift. This is the heaviest brake assembly I've ever felt. I'm doing these by hand, just to make sure nothing's cross-threaded or unhappy, or you should be able to put them in by hand with relative ease. I'm comfortable with how these are all seated, so I'm gonna run them in very lightly, very gently with the impact. Always in a cross pattern, by the way. We're gonna torque these down. Before reinstalling the caliper bracket, you'll need to clean everything up, re-grease your guide pins, and install new pad retaining clips. Brand new bolts, dab of Loctite. And these babies get torqued to a massive 203 foot-pounds of torque. The struggle. Yes! Once the caliper bracket was installed, I made sure to add a bit more caliper grease to the pad retaining clips before clipping in the pads. And again, you'll see me adding a bit more grease to the pads themselves anywhere they contact the caliper bracket. Alright. Where's that grease? Yes. Home stretch, people. If only you knew how long the first side took us. Alright, last step. These little guys have the weird torque sequence. These are called torque to yield bolts. So we're gonna torque them to only 20 foot-pounds and then another 90 degrees, which stretches the bolt, giving it the proper amount of torque, which is why they're one-time use only. Screwdriver in between the brake rotor and the caliper bracket to hold it in place. The actual last step is to turn these another 90 degrees. So how do you know you turned them 90 degrees? What I decided to do was put a mark at the top, matched with the mark on the bolt, and then a mark at 90 degrees. And I'm going to turn that bolt till the paint mark on the bolt lines up with that one. And I'm going to do that for all 5 in a star pattern. See how the mark on the bolt is facing that? We've got them all turned 90 degrees. This front brake job is done. Now on to the rear. After getting the wheel out of the way, I'm going to start off by removing the caliper with the 13mm socket. And look at that, it comes right off. Time to take these out. We're throwing them away, just like the fronts. In the front, the brakes were sandwiched behind the front hubs, which we replaced. In the rear, they're sandwiched behind the axle. This is actually the axle shaft. We have to remove that, so it's gonna leak fluid. So I have a drain pan here, if you're wondering. So it should just pop out now, we'll see. See the fluid? Just let this drain out for a bit. Next, we pull out our friend again. And we have to twist this rotor so it can come out these slots. Easier said than done. Headphone users beware. The rear axle shaft is sealed by an O-ring that must be replaced. This is included in the Dorman rear brake bolt kit linked below. Before you slide the axle shaft back in, be sure to put a little bit of oil on that O-ring you just installed. Once you make it to this point, you will feel the axle shaft stop. This is hitting the inner axle seal, and you must carefully lift the end of the axle shaft up to slide it through that inner seal without damaging it. Brand new bolts. Because Ford, lowest setting on the impact, just gonna run them in. This notch needs to go down. Apparently Ford installed some of these brackets backwards, so if you're doing this, make sure this little cutout is on the bottom. Time for pads. You have one with the hook, one without. The hook is on the inside. In the rear only, which is kind of strange, you need a disc brake pad and caliper service tool kit. It locks into these two grooves right here. You have to twist the caliper piston back into the caliper. You cannot just push it with the C-clamp like we did in the front. And you probably can't see it, but there's an arrow right here that tells you which direction you need to twist it. So in this case, we're twisting it to the right. Lastly, these two marks need to remain straight up and down, just as they are now when we're done putting the piston back. These are torque to yield bolts, just like the fronts. So we are going to torque them to 35 foot-pounds and then another 70 degrees this time. So let's get them to 35 and then we'll worry about the degrees. For the degrees, we have a 6-sided bolt here. We're going to assume that between one side and the other is about 60 degrees. So I'm gonna put a mark on one and another mark a little past the next side of the bolt, if you will, and a mark on the bolt, and we're gonna turn them until they line up. Similar to the fronts, except we're gonna use the hex head bolts here to help us.
Well, thanks for watching this far. You got to see Greg install new brakes on the van.
That was a battle, I'm not gonna lie. But as always, on to the important stuff. How much did the brakes cost? So, for the brakes, they cost $896.10. And that's brakes and the new front hubs. So, grand total to get the van up to par, all the maintenance is $1,220.34.
Yeah, so how many hours did it take us on the brakes? It took 8.5 hours.
It was a battle.
It was a battle, but Greg's a trooper.
Yeah.
I did a really good job getting tools.
She did.
So that brings our total to about 14 hours and 45 minutes for all of the maintenance so far. So next week we will be doing some demo and rust prevention
In preparation to build our subfloor.
Thanks for watching. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next Wednesday. We just hit the bottom of our garage door with the van as we were jacking it up. She's all so rusty.
All right, what's next? Done. No, we're not. Not done. Want to be done.
Does my filming annoy you?
No, I'm just hungry and ready to be done.